Okay, I've been asked specifically to try and explicate blues per se, and I'll try and keep it short form. Blues, like rock and roll, is a commercial concept. It, in and of itself, does not exist. It only existed because the A&R people demanded it, named it, and marketed it. It had several forms, one of which derived from popular music of the day. Mamie Smith's Crazy Blues was essentially a Tin Pan Alley composition. It had no ethnic or long-standing traditional origins. The first recording of a blues by a black man, which was done on a Gibson trapdoor banjo guitar, was by Papa Charlie Jackson, and it was an 8-bar blues. For those of you who are not paper trained in music, bars refer to the way that music is annotated, thanks to Guido Arezzo. And you have to understand, when music was first written down, it was written down for choirs. And they only had one book. It was one very great big book so that everybody could see it. And it had everybody's part on it at once. There were 11 lines. And over the centuries, for the convenience of people who could not conceive of the 11 lines, the middle one was erased. And it is always remembered that it's supposed to be there. It's middle C. And it's written in as accidental to the staves, so that you have 5 lines above and 5 lines below in modern music. And you separate the sequences of the rhythm into vertical segments called bars. And Papa Charlie Jackson recorded, "I love my baby, and my baby, she loved me. Lordy Lord, Lordy Lord, 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 Lord." Now that counts out to 8 bars of 4 beats each. And that's a complete sequence for a verse. Because of a tradition in English narrative poetry, the word isn't coming to my mind right this second, but there was a tradition when you had a large audience listening to these epic narrative poems, that the leader, the speaker, would do 2 lines, and then the audience would have a refrain that would indicate they were still listening. And so from that, and from certain African traditions, which are not exactly the same, but mostly from the European English tradition, there developed a 12-bar version which usually has the first line repeated twice, followed by a rhyming third line. Let's see. Got the blues, can't be satisfied. I got the blues, I can't be satisfied. Keep the blues, gonna take that train and ride. Back to that in a second, but that's 12 bars of 4 beats each. Then you have a third one, which is 16 bars, where the first line is repeated 3 times, followed by the rhyming final line. These things were developed, again I say, because the mechanical reproduction of music, coming in as it did at the end of the 19th century, wanted to have material that they could sell. And they had no way of developing that at the time. So they went out throughout the country and tried to find performers already doing something that would sell. Most of it didn't. So they started to decide that the people in the recording industry knew more about marketing and the successful making of money than the performers did. They would send out talent scouts like Spear in the East, who owned a furniture store, and he would have people come in and audition, and he would send the audition records north to New York, Chicago, wherever, Grafton. And if they liked them up there, then they would invite the artists up to record. The people, the A&R people in the studios, could remember what they had heard before and what they had already produced. They figured they didn't want to have covers of somebody else's song. They couldn't sell a second version of it. I'll tell you a story quickly in a moment about that phenomenon. But in any case, if you went to Grafton, they were on you. What do you know that you've made up or that's different? That you can prove to us we've never heard it before, and we might record that. When Skip James went north to Grafton and heard that they were going to pay per side, per song, he immediately made up 8 new songs in the studio just to try and increase his paycheck, as did a lot of other people. Other folks, like the man who created what I just played, John Smith Hurt, who comes from Avalon here in Mississippi. He had material that he used performing out live, and that's all he knew. He didn't have ways to generate new material off the cuff. Now, as to the idea of the A&R people demanding no covers, when Bessie Smith went to New York, she wanted to sing a song, "Once I had to live the life of a millionaire, spend all my money like I didn't care." Well, there had been 8 records of that already produced, and nobody was going to allow her to record it. But she insisted, and Bessie Smith's record outsold all previous 8 combined. So the people in the recording studios who imagined that they were wizards at this, they couldn't play music. They didn't know how music was created, and they were pretty much an impediment towards the progress of either documenting what the folklorists would wish we had, or, for that matter, taking advantage of the creativity of the people who came to their studios. The other enormous impediment was that they plied these people with alcohol before they could record. And as a case with Tommy Johnson, again from here in Mississippi, I don't know why Tommy Johnson has not been held up as the poster boy for alcoholism. He should have been. That's all he ever sang about. Every record is filled with it. And if you learn his history, he was utterly crippled by it. Give him 2 drinks, he could no longer play. He could barely sing, and he died before he was 35, much before he was 35. Rube Lacey talks about last time he saw him, and Tommy was wishing that he could be rid of alcohol, and and Tommy would drink any kind of alcohol. One of the greatest lies ever told by bluesmen. I woke up this morning. Each player had their own styles. Tommy had brothers, Major Johnson, Liddell Johnson, who mostly went into the church and survived, so they're documented. There's a wonderful book called The Big Road Blues, which tells a lot of the history of the 20s, especially down in Drew, which was a major gathering place for blues musicians who worked on the plantation down there until 1928, when it was purported that some black bluesman had killed a white girl, and suddenly there were no more black bluesmen in Drew. They all decided to go elsewhere before they were hung. With that as a sort of general background of how blues came to be as a commercial event, it wasn't named the blues much before records were made, and blues was the driving force, much as the name rock and roll was a driving marketable force. It had little or nothing to do with the derivation of music. The term rock and roll actually comes from drilling stone, like making tunnels and so forth. The drill bit, which was held by the shaker, which is a huge cross-ended piece of steel or iron, was hit by a sledgehammer held by somebody else, and hopefully they hit the end of the drill every time, but he would sink it, and therefore the shaker would have to rock and roll the bit 1/8 of a turn so that the next time it would sink into rock and make the hole they wanted. The other half of the music that came from the end of the 19th century comes from 7 sources. And I don't know if I can name them quickly, but and they come mostly from the Gulf Coast. You have the English, the Scots-Irish, the English ballad tradition, like I was talking about earlier, the Scots-Irish dance music. The French played many of the same tunes the Scotch-Irish did, but they harmonized them differently. The Scots-Irish would use the 1-4-5 chords, the tonic, subdominant, and dominant. The French used the cycle of fifths, using all major chords. And they would play the same tunes. And so ragtime music grew out of the French harmonizations in the cycle of fifths. You had the Caribbean and African rhythmic traditions. I can't remember how many I'm up to. And then on top of that, especially in New Orleans, you had the influx of the Eastern European klezmerine, who were wandering bands of musicians playing whatever instruments were available at the time, particularly short horns and the clarinet. And so the roots of the jazz music out of New Orleans grew from that sort of combo, the clarinet, the trumpet or cornet, and then the final stroke. There was this country and the world has been racked every few decades by the latest Argentinian dance craze. And at the beginning of the 20th century, it was called the tango. Now the orchestras at the time, the string players were frustrated because the woodbox instruments wouldn't speak loud enough to have a part in this. So a new instrument was created, a It was created because it was assumed that string players would already know the fingering and know how to play it. And it was generally referred to as the tango banjo. And it came out in 1910. Well, in the mid-20s, pre-electric recording had a great problem. And that was the modulation of sound, how loud things were. Because if it was too loud, the cutting needle would swing so wide it would go into the neighboring channel, in the neighboring groove, and it would ruin the tape. And when the original New Orleans jazz band, 4 guys, came up to New York to record, Baby Dodds was playing a stand-up bass, and they could not arrange it any way that that bass wasn't ruining the cut. And so finally, the recording engineer took the stand-up bass away from Baby Dodds and handed him a tango banjo and said, "Here, I know this works." And that was the first time and the only time that 4-string banjo had any part in jazz music, especially New Orleans jazz music, but it has become emblematic of New Orleans jazz music ever since. So a lot of this stuff isn't organic or to give an idea of how Bones applies to some of this stuff, my playing partner here from many decades, Hank will demonstrate a couple of things here. We'll do a fast one first from Mississippi John Hurt's repertoire. Indigenous to this continent, and it may have a influence from the people who were living here before the massive introduction of people from across the seas, and that is syncopation. And this was explained to me most explicitly by George Carroll, who created the cadence for President Kennedy's funeral cortege. And he was one of the premier Thai snare drummers. He worked in the Army for 25 years. And he said, all the armies in the world in the last 400 or 500 years using the drum for signal calls, you can tell where they come from, which country they come from, by the way they play the drum. The Germans play different from the Swiss, play different from the French, but most significantly, none of them play like the Americans do. The Americans always have syncopation, which is best explicated by an experiment. First of all, see if you can find both hands. Empty of lighted screens if possible. And we'll start with breaking a beat into 4 parts. First, there is the pulse. So this would be like the bass part. And then, so it's the alto part. And then with the fingers one hand and the palm on the other, and that's very even, but it's impulsed by the accent and different of the beats. And then the final one, which is okay, so quickly, I don't know how I can divide this, but let's say beyond the bar there, and you, sir, if you would hold the pulse, the bass beat, and this next section can do the alto, and this group here can do the soprano, and this last row on this side we can do the tenor part. So that's one of the explications of breaking down the rhythm. And that last one is the syncopated beat. It is advanced from the pulse. It is stuck between. Now, in the same way, and I'll try not to go into this because it took 14 hours for me to view it. But Leonard Bernstein, you know who he was asked to sit the poetry chair in Harvard for a year to explicate music through words. And he created 4 lectures, 4 or 5 I think, which are now on YouTube, and it's called The Unanswered Question. It's very valuable to watch, but one of the basic things that he talks about is that music is not created, it's derived. It exists before us. We're only beginning to learn about it. And originally, a single note, and everything was unison. But a string or a horn or anything else that produces music does not simply vibrate at one frequency at any one time. If you divide the string in half, you get tones that are twice as high as the original one. If you divide it into quarters, you get the second octave. If you divide it into thirds, you get the fifth. Now, several hundred years ago, or 500-600 years ago, there was a string instrument that was analogous to the alp horn. It was 7 feet long, one great long string. You played it with a bow, and you didn't press down on the string, you played the harmonics. Walking close to the end of it. Now, as you get close and closer to the end, you get the fifth, the fourth, the third, but then you wind up with what are called blue notes. They're not part of our Western scale. They're between the intervals of our Western scale. Now, blues as music made great advantage of these blue notes, especially between the fifth and the sixth, between the sixth and the seventh, and the difference between the major and the minor thirds. Skip James, one of my guitar teachers, made special use of this variant of Sebastopol tuning. That's one of his creations, and he tried to be different from everybody else. It was essentially his purpose in life. He was a trained musician. He had several years of college and seminary training. You should have heard him on pipe organ. The man was absolutely incredible. And talk about syncopation. That man, he could drop out at one point and just count beats in his head, suddenly return to the music. It was quite frightening, his capacity with timing. You may or may not recognize that Cream took that and made a huge hit out of it. When I was talking with my guitar teachers back 50 years ago, whenever it was, I said, well, you guys, you had mechanicals available to you, you had record players, you bought records. Whose records were you buying? And to a man, they all said they were buying Lonnie Johnson records. Lonnie Johnson, brother of James Steady Roll Johnson, came out of New Orleans, and they both played the violin. They were hired in an orchestra in 1916-17, and that orchestra had been scheduled to go on a European trip. Even though there was a war going over in Europe, they went with the orchestra over to Europe as violin players. In 1918, not only the flu, but the yellow fever hit New Orleans, and out of their family of 17, when they got back to this country, the only one still alive was the mother. So they never returned to New Orleans. Lonnie Johnson played with Lil Armstrong, played with Eddie Lang, played with all kinds of musicians, and referred to himself as an urban blues man. He wasn't from the country, he only played music about cities. But his records were extremely popular throughout the country. That song that I just played was an idea of Skip's drawn from a snatch of a line from a Lonnie Johnson record. The amusing thing about that was that the A&R man had come out and said, you play all this slow music, don't you know how to play anything fast? So Skip started that somewhat slower, and then he came out of his room and he said, I hate to say this to you, but my machine won't record it that fast. Could you slow it down? Oh yeah, yeah. It has just volumes of lyrics, and it has really researched history. Now here's an example of the same event happening in Africa as happened here. Guabi kuswamble no tamiyam, ihalale kame shuyam tanda. Guabi kuswamble no tamiyam, ihalale kame shuyam tanda. Kizantenge lama panza, kiziwichi le banana. Kizantenge lama panza, kiziwichi le banana. Okay, so to give you an example of a different rhythmic content, I will defer to a much later recording artist, Nobel laureate, who wrote songs about the blues. I've been living the blues every night without you. I don't have to go far to know where you are. Strangers don't hear me new. I've been living the blues every night without you. I think that it's better I soon get some rest and forget my pride. Still I can't deny something that I carry for you deep down inside. If you see me this way, you come back and you say, oh, how good if you. I've been living the blues every night without you. Now quickly, a couple of other instruments. The banjo, the five-string banjo, is one of the latest formats for this instrument. The concept of the instrument, as far as I've been able to determine, goes back about 20,000 years. The idea of having a gourd, something or other, originally skulls were used, stretching some sort of animal skin across it, putting a pole on through it, stretching strings across with a bridge attached. Probably started in China and worked its way west. The dilruba is an example of the Indian version of it. In Africa, there were instruments with 2 or 3 strings on them, or there's the kora, which can have 28 strings on it. There's evidence that African instruments were in Europe in the 16th and 17th century. And the griots in West Africa used a version of this with long strings and the chanterelle, the short string, to tell histories. If you go to the Hermitage in Nashville, Andy Jackson's home, and you look at the room off the kitchen, behind the kitchen, which was a nursery, at least when I was there, there was a banjo that had 3 long strings and 1 short string. In the early 1830s, a man by the same name of Sweeney claims to have added the 4th long string, the low string, changing it from a diatonic to a chromatic instrument. In other words, not just playing in 1 key or 2 keys, but being able to play in all the keys. And you can actually access all of the 12 semitone keys with great rapidity, and at the time of the Civil War, it was tuned in the key of G. After the Civil War, it was moved up a key to the key of A. Then some people took it over to England and taught the Prince of Wales how to play, and the gut strings didn't survive over there, so they put metal strings on it. Americans feeling inferior in everything, and the most vital word in their language is important. That is, what we have here is crap, and we have to import the good stuff. Looked at the English banjos and said, oh, look what they have, we don't have that. So starting at the beginning of the 20th century, American banjos were tuned with metal strings, which could not sound true at that low pitch, so they were moved up to C. But some of the old dances on the banjo from just before the Civil War sounded like this. Is called the stroke style because you use the back of your fingernail as if you were knocking on a door. They also used the guitar style in which you pull your fingertips towards the center of your palm, and a couple of those pieces sound like this. We think of a lot of this music as being fairly recently derived from the New World, from the Caribbean Basin, and so forth, the polyrhythms, a certain amount of the syncopation. But if you look back a few centuries, you will find out that there was a great a dissonance or discontinuity, to put it that way, between mainland Europe and the islands off of Europe. And there was a lot of music from the Canary Islands, for instance, and their musics are called canarios, which have this lively, jumpy, very highly syncopated rhythm, similar to what we think of as coming from the Caribbean. Am I taking up too much time? Okay, one other quick experiment. Now that you've found your hands, that's a good idea. See if you can find your hands and your knees at the same time. This will be a little more complex, but it will demonstrate the musical concept of the hemiola, where you play one rhythm against another simultaneously, such that the shorter rhythm rotates its impulse through the longer rhythm. Now, to do this, put your right hand on your right knee, put your left hand 8 inches over top, lift up your right hand, put it runs into your left hand, put it down again. Now on the other side, left hand on your left knee, right hand over top, lift, no, don't do that hard, because then you got nowhere to go. You lift up your left hand to your right hand, put your left hand down again. So, right, up, down, left, up, down. Right, up, down, left, up, down. Right, up, down, up, down. Now, you might think that this is a 3/4 rhythm, as A, C, wood, white, sweet, strawberry town. But actually, this is an African hand game that comes to us through the Gullah Geechee and the Georgian Sea Islands. And what happens is that you play it a little faster, and then you count 4 on top of it. Juke, juke. Do the this, do the that, do the kill the yellow cat, grind the meal, give me the hub. Bake the bread, give me the crust. Cook the meat, give me the skin, and that's the way my mama trouble begin to do. Do the this, do the that, do the kill the yellow cat, grind the meal, give me the hub. Bake the bread, give me the crust. Cook the meat, give me the skin, and that's the way my mama trouble begin to do. Which led to now, one of the earliest discoveries of that behavior is it hurts. Therefore, it is my postulation that after their mastodon meat, people in early caves decided to mess with the leftovers and create some of the same concepts without causing themselves mortal injury. The handiest ones can remember. On Monday, my child was arrested. On Tuesday, was locked up in jail. On Thursday, on Wednesday, my child was arrested. On Thursday, wasn't nobody go my tail, and it's gone. Almost done, and it's gone. Almost done, and it's all almost done, and I ain't gonna ring them yellow and doorbell. Take these stripes them off my shoulder. Take these chains, Chain come around my leg, well these stripes, they surely do not worry me. But these chains gonna kill me dead, and it's all almost done, and it's all almost done, and it's all almost done, and I ain't gonna ring them yellow doorbell. Before I get to the other one, there were some instruments that were very, very popular in the United States that have more or less passed by the wayside. During the Civil War, this instrument was found on more battlefields than any other musical instrument. It was easy to carry, it was handy to play, and you could play any kind of music on it, as long as you could tolerate vibrating your skull. You place your teeth against the outer parts of this horseshoe sort of shaped thing, and as you strike the twanger, you breathe across it, at the same time changing the capacity of your oral cavity to create different pitches. And this instrument, which used to be made of metal, called the nose flute, I first became aware of in Cracker Jack boxes. And it uses many of the same principles, but in this case you breathe through your nose and use the oral cavity but the older version of it, similar to the bow harp, which you put against your jaw, which is like a bow and arrow kind of bow with a single string. Now, I never have a way to prepare with this, so whatever comes out is the first thing that comes to my mind. It could be an O'Carolan tune, it could be an old fiddle tune, or a children's play party song. One of the problems is that you wind up hyperventilating. One of my guitar teachers who's kind of still remembered in this area is Eddie House Jr. They're locally known as Son. A lot of these people never really got to use their names. Nehemiah Curtis James, who was a very tall man and must have been quite imposing in his youth, was a frolicsome child, and everybody called him Skippy. And for some reason that name stuck. and for the rest of his name he was referred to as Skip James, which possibly he didn't want to be called Nehemiah, or Curtis for that matter, I don't know. But Son House was churchified when he was 15. There's a wonderful set of articles in the Blues Museum downtown. I wholeheartedly recommend you read up about him. There's a pretty accurate and authentic history of him. And throughout the rest of his life, he started preaching when he was 20, had a parish or a congregation by that time, and he had some songs that he liked to sing in performance in later life that came from that part of his life. Now, the other thing that is constantly referred to is that blues is the devil's music. This idea goes back to this instrument. This instrument, as you see it now, not blue, but in its shape and conformation, is really dates only from about late 1600s. And it wasn't until 1735 that they regularized the proportions of it, because previous to that time, each city had their own frequency for the note A. Some thought that 428 was the right pitch, and some thought 434, and some thought 444, and some thought as high as 454 or 460. And their instruments were made to sound appropriate to the pitch A that they were used to hearing locally. When musicians started to travel from city to city, their instruments did not fit the tuning of the other cities. So if you ever want to know if you have a really old violin, check and see whether the peg box has been grafted on to another neck, because that's the sure sign that they saved the peg box from the original maker, but they lengthened or shortened the neck to make it conform with A440. Anyway, when this instrument was first popularized, there were laws in European cities saying you could be arrested if you had one in your possession after dark in a city. And it was referred to, and still to this day is referred to, as the devil's instrument. And there are people like myself who refrain from playing it in a house of worship because of fearing to offend people who had the old beliefs. It had to do with the fact that it made people dance and influenced women towards sensuality. Anyway, blues per se is no more secular, and the only thing religious about music is the words. The notes, the rhythms, all the rest of it is utterly non-committal. Don't you mind the people grinning in your face? Don't you mind the people grinning in your face? Don't you mind the people grinning in your face? Just as bad as is in mine, and a true friend is hard to find. Don't you mind people grinning in your face? Well, your mama's gonna try to get you, yes, and your brother and your sister too. to get to you just a fair position mine. Two friends are, don't you mind the people grinning in your face? Don't mind the people grinning in your face. Don't you mind the people grinning in your face? Just there, this of mine. Two friends is hard to find. Well, your friends are gonna try to get you. Yes, they're gonna try to turn you around. And as soon as your back is turned, Lord, they're gonna try to crush you down. Just a bear, this is mine. The true friend is hard to find. Now, I don't mean to be educating you about things you would already know about, but my friend here lent me a instruction book about the bones from the pre-Revolutionary War period, in which it was described that you were to wrap them around your index finger, never to put them further down in your hand. And you had, of course, two pair, and I'll have to stand up to demonstrate this. And you, to be a part of the consort, or the ensemble, you were to, I have to remember my ballet. Okay, you were to stand in fourth position and rattle through the first section of music and stop slightly before they move to the next section while you change to the other side of the fourth position. The commonest way that people play it now is wrapped around the middle finger. The Irish tend to put two fingers between to get a very ticky sound at the end of the bones. And if you're very, very clever and have a longer set of bones, which I left mine in the room, and you hold them parallel to each other rather than convex to convex, you can get both ends to rattle, but maintaining a sequential rhythm consonant with other musicians is sometimes difficult. Is there anything else you wanted to do?
Maybe you can go out and it takes a long time to get over.
Okay, let me do this first and we'll do that. Wow.
Let him go on for a bit. The food is ready, so, and I don't want to stop the guy. So if you want to go and have some food, go ahead. It's very interesting.
I've been playing recently with the Gulf Coast Banjo Society, and they play a range of music from 1890s forward, and they always close with this little tune. And then they have different of the players do solos with it. been singing this song since I'm 16, so I don't want you to think that I am impugning your beings at this moment. When you get old and feeble and you can't walk get around, you'll have to take your walking sticks all over town. You'll hear those young folks talking, they'll be whispering all around. Oh, grandpa would be better off if he was 6 foot under the ground. We live a long, long time, you know. We live a long, long time, you know. Oh, there ain't no use to cry. Oh, grandpa got to die. We live a long, long time. When you were back in high school and you were jumping, now every time you move, you begin to crack and pop. Yeah, you remember the good old days when you were in your prime. You burned all that money, but you didn't save the time. We live a long, long time. We live a long, long time, you know. So there ain't no use to cry. Oh, grandpa got to die. We live a long, long time. Now when you get old and people and this world turn you down, you remember back when you were the best dressed man in town. Well, you are still in training, you're waiting for the day when you can throw your false teeth and walk your cane away. We live a long, long time, you know. We live a long, long time, you know. So there ain't no use to cry. Oh, grandpa got to die. We live a long